Hello, friends. My name is Steve, and we're here today to discuss Brother Red by Mr. Adrian Selby. Adrian, thanks for hanging out with us today.
Thank you very much for having me on. A real pleasure. Looking forward to it. Hello to whoever is out there.
Yeah. So, can you give us an introduction? Tell us a little bit about yourself and your work.
I have three books published. Brother Red is the third and most recent, although it was 2020 when it came out. Um, it's a standalone fantasy novel. The other two are set in the same world. There are links between them, as Steve might have discovered once he'd read the epilogue of Brother Red. But the first, back in 2016, was Snakewood, and 2018 the Winter Road. And I previously did a sort of a podcast with you, didn't I, Steve, going
Mm-hmm.
through the Winter Road last year sometime. I can't remember. I lose track. So I'm working on another book now. That's going to take quite a while. I've got tons going on in my other life generally. Obviously, got a family, but I'm a town councillor. I took on some town councilling, doing a bit of public service. So that's pretty cool. That's been pretty good. But I might need to put that on the back burner to actually get the next book done on those stands of chance. And I run a game development studio for Warner Brothers, which is quite full on. And particularly at the moment, we're collaborating with our sister studio in Boston. So yeah, it's a long day because I got the UK day, and then kind of a bit of Boston time creeps in now and again. They're not too bad, but yeah, it doesn't leave a great deal of time for writing. So yeah, I've been a game developer for quite a number of years. Yeah, I think that's me.
Wow, you're a busy man. And Layla, will you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I'm a professor of English, also a writer, also just recently lost a magazine, Ballady magazine online, and interested in publishing work by sci-fi and fantasy writers. So,
Nice, awesome. Well, thanks
and
both of you
I
for.
enjoyed Brother Red very much.
Brilliant. Thank you very much.
Nice. Well, thanks both of you for coming by today. I know it's a busy time of year, so I appreciate your time. So, Adrian, can you give us a little bit about Brother Red? Kind of what your goals were, what kind of story you wanted to tell, what was your inspiration for it?
So Brother Red, off the back of Snakewood, which was I sold Snakewood to Orbit, and it was a one book deal because it was a standalone book, and they said we'd like two more from you, please. And I thought, oh great, I haven't got any others. What am I going to write? And they said, well, think of some ideas. We would like two more books. Ideally standalone books. And so in the writing of Snakewood, the idea of the Winter Road came from a moment in Snakewood where uh, they swear. One of the characters swears an oath on a child's bloodied shirt, um, and in in that book, I introduce fieldsmen. This idea of fieldsmen, kind of like James Bond type super assassin characters, but basically, or you might call them mechanics. Hitmen, cleaners, people who solve problems for the Post. And the Post, for those that aren't familiar, is this sort of global merchant organization that's incredibly powerful, and has its fingers in lots of pies and its kingdoms and stuff, and it's generally quite nefarious in Snakewood. um, so while I was interested in following up the story of the origin of the bloodied shirt that the chiefs, or they're called the High Reds of the Post, swear their oath on when they become the High Red, um, I'd also written in Snakewood a moment where a red who was part of a caravan, or I think just a group of soldiers moving through some mountains, had saved the life of one of the characters in Snakewood, but he died. And when she got back to his fort where he was based, um, there's a kind of a ritual, and his wife rides up on a horse, and they all sing a hymn, Brother Red. So I was trying to think of how they would honour a death, and I was thinking of the military service where they fold the flag I guess that's the American kind of military service, isn't it? When they present the flag to the soldier's partner. And being Welsh, I was thinking it would be nice if there was some kind of hymn, some kind of song, some chorus that they would all sing. And I just thought I'd call it Brother Red. And I thought it's got to be really cool, but I don't have to think of that now. I'll just call it Brother Red, this beautiful hymn, and leave it. And so I was thinking of another idea besides the Winter Road. I thought, well, what would be the origin of that song, Brother Red? Who inspired Brother Red? Who is Brother Red? And so that was the initial spark. At the same time, I was interested in, I thought I could fold this into telling the story of the first fieldsman. I was quite into what the fieldsmen were and how they operate. They had a lot of freedom. They're elite warriors, but they've also got to be really sort of clever and savvy. They've got to be able to make friends. They've got to be able to fit in, sort of perfect spies. And I thought, well, that'll be a good person to have as a protagonist as well. So those are the kind of the two initial sparks that I sort of began to grow out the story from.
Yeah, interesting. Well, as I'm listening, I was thinking back to your biography. First of all, I have a lot of questions, but I'll start with this one.
Fab, go for it.
And as I recall, you mentioned that you had studied creative writing.
That's right.
Right. And I've been through a creative writing program too. And I'm curious, what in your opinion, how did it help you? Did you originate your story ideas at that time, that you're writing about now during the program, or was it more of an evolution into what you're doing now?
I did. The story for Snakewood was so old that I think the first two chapters of Snakewood, obviously in a far less well refined form, formed the basis of my final year's kind of not dissertation, I guess, but the writing that you hand in, however many thousand words you've got to hand in. Yeah, I mean, it helped me massively. I was rubbish at writing. I mean, I wanted to be a writer since I was 8 years old. I thought I would be a writer. I used to write huge stories. My teachers used to think it was great, And then I applied for this creative writing degree, and they rejected me. They just said no. So, so it's just not good enough. So someone had advised me. I can't remember who, because I owe them a bottle of champagne or whatever. But someone had said, well, why don't you? Because I would never have thought of this. Why don't you just go to the college, sign up for 2 other courses, and then go and speak to the creative writing tutor and just beg to get on the course, because it should be easier if you're already in, you're already kind of there. I mean, that's exactly what happened. I went up to he's gone now, bless him, but John Singleton, who was the head of the creative writing department at it's now the Manchester Metropolitan, it was Crewe and Alsager College, and I basically said, look, I'm only here for the writing, and you'd rejected me, but I'm just desperate to do it. And he said, well, okay, write me a couple of pieces by tomorrow, 3,000 words each, or whatever it was, or 3,000 words between them. I think he was just testing whether I was really keen. And of course, I went home, scribbled those out, and he said, okay, you can swap over to the course. You clearly want to be a writer, and then I was so much worse than everyone around me. I was, just terrible. Oh no! It was bad. They would be. I can remember very distinctly reading part of the first chapter of what eventually became the first chapter of Snakewood, and they'd be in this silence afterwards, people just like not knowing what to say. But the value of it was for me being exposed to other literature, because up until that point, I'd read lots of fantasy novels, whether it's Conan, Lord of the Rings, all that kind of stuff. I read what I enjoyed and knew. And then they said, right, you're going to read all these other books that I'd never heard of. I was very, not at all well read, So I think the first sort of literary fiction book I'd read, that you might call literary fiction, was Maya Angelou's I Know What the Caged Bird Sings. And that was the first book that they gave us to read on the writing course. And I would never have picked it up at the time. And when I started to read it, obviously the writing is magnificent, and it was captivating, and it was like classics get, the scales peel off your eyes, and so I was exposed to an awful lot of literary fiction. There was obviously emphasis then on you'd study a bit of feminist fiction and all this stuff, but all of it, none of it was fantasy, none of it was sci-fi. Well, maybe Kurt Vonnegut, I think we did Slaughterhouse-5 at one point, but all of it was just completely opened my eyes, and made me realize that there was some incredible writing out there, some incredibly powerful and moving stories, and it taught me such a lot about the importance of reading widely. So it was hugely valuable in that respect. I'd had the idea of Snakewood, these two old soldiers that were, one of them was dying, they needed to get somewhere. It was all very vague at that point in time, and I wanted to write a fantasy novel, but I realized that I wanted to, once I'd been exposed to great writing, a lot of the books I might have read, I would look at and think this feels a little bit lightweight, the characters just feel a little bit cardboard, a bit two-dimensional, sadly slightly too much fantasy for me, as incredible world building, but characters that I'm just not connecting a great deal with. I obviously never want to diss another author, but I just finished one that was like that. The world building and the magic systems and everything were brilliant, but I was kind of grinding through it because the characters themselves, they were fine, they were okay people, but I didn't particularly care about them, and there's not a great deal of fantasy where I really cared about the characters, but so much of the fiction I do. Hopefully I'm not upsetting lots of people in saying this. It just made me realize that more than anything, I suppose, that where I might have focused on world building and magic and this, that, and the other, actually what was important was people and characters, and that what was moving me was relationships, and that I thought, well, it would be great. Because with Snakewood, and I carried it on with the Winter Road and now Brother Red, even before the degree, I thought I don't want to tell a story that's about the kings or the characters that, like with the magic ring that can change the world, and they fight the biggest, baddest dragons. I thought it would be great to tell smaller stories in a fantasy world. Who are all the other people that populate this world? They must have trials and tribulations, and there must be acts of courage and kindness and desperation and all sorts, in these worlds, because they, medieval worlds are very savage worlds, and I thought it'd be interesting to maybe just tell a story that's slightly different. I imagine there's a million fantasy stories like it, but I very much wanted to do something a bit different in the genre, and maybe not make it always epic. Let's go. I think it's called low fantasy now, or I'm not quite sure if there's a particular title for it, but yeah, it focuses on small, ordinary people. Well, they might be thieves and assassins and very capable people in their fields, but they're not necessarily changing the fate of the world and all that kind of stuff, So that, yeah, they were the sort of the key. That's how it evolved me and confirmed to me that focus in on the characters, Adrian, and really make it try and write a character that's memorable. Try and tell a story where people really care about the protagonists. I class myself as I am a novice author. I've only written 3 books, those 3 books, and so to me it's a key challenge to well, yeah, it's a key challenge, I suppose, to try and do that, to try and just tell a story where people cared about your characters. It seems, but I guess what I'm trying to say is it seems like a basic ambition, but I'm a novice writer, so it's like, let's try and do that. Let's try and do that one thing, put a protagonist or 2 in one of these books that people really care about. And if I can do that, then that's great. That's me. That's a very big deal. That's a huge achievement for me. And I'll worry then, as with the next book, about whether I can do a trilogy or sustain a story or whatever, over many books, or a character or whatever, or tell a character's life story, for example, one step at a time. So 3 standalones, and maybe I now feel like I'm getting ready to do something a little bit more ambitious.
I think it's amazing you're describing yourself as a novice writer because
Subtly.
I mean that's not that's not what I picked up from this book. I haven't read the first two. I mean, this one caught my eye through Steve's site, and the summary sounded interesting, so I wanted to read it. But definitely, I do think you've fulfilled that with the characters,
Mm.
and also given the characters some unique, unique connections. But I want to back up first and uh, say a couple of things or ask about the magic systems because um, I detected at least two. One is more biologically based, and I would include the potions. I couldn't decide if it was alchemy, the fight brew, for example.
Yeah.
I couldn't decide if I would call that organic or if I would call that alchemy. Because alchemy actually is changing, one
Yeah.
substance to another.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. So then, and also the magist, if I'm pronouncing that correctly.
You are, yes. Yeah, the magist. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It is. It is kind of two. The
Mhm.
next, the metaphysics of it all. I've is actually become a lot more important for the one I've just started now. But the power that the magist has in metaphysical terms sits underneath the much more organic and, like I say, in biological kind of power of the fight brews. I've probably gone with the with what a fight brew can do in terms of the ingredients. I've probably, like I say, I'd always intended to really dial it up and kind of make it semi-magical, but not but sort of plausibly real, like plausibly
Mhm.
sort of chemical and biological. I'm wrestling with that now because it doesn't quite match with the metaphysics that it has evolved with my thinking of the future stories. That metaphysics has undergone an evolution while I've been writing these three books, and so there's a bit of friction there. I'm just trying to work out now because it's going to be important later on in some of the new writing that I'm doing. But yeah, they should. In going back over Brother Red, as I say to Steve before we came online, yeah, I've reread the book over the last 2 days, and yeah, there's the power of the Magus. It seems much more magical.
Mm.
It isn't. Uh,
Mhm.
but obviously the bigger context will reveal itself in future stories. But yeah, it is um of a different order, a completely different magnitude of, if you like, capability or power um than what the fight brews can do. And so yeah, I think that's kind of become more of a thread as you go through the three books. But on this particular world, it's very much the fight brews are king, and this idea. And I think I've talked about this in previous videos and other interviews. That I'd read Slain back 2000 AD, I think, when the Slain first appeared, and the warp spasms that Slain would have, and I was thinking about the concoctions that can be drunk. Is it the Vikings? I can't remember, but they drink these concoctions. Or Slain drinks them, and he spasms and becomes crazily physically transformed and mutated,
Mhm.
and gains incredible power. And I thought, oh, that's awesome, that's brilliant, and I'd always shied away from proper zappy lightning staffs and magic items magic, like, as in, that's all cool.
Mhm.
But in my fantasy, I thought I want something that's taken a few drugs in my time, way back, long time ago, everyone, long time ago. So it's not good for you.
Mhm.
Um, and particularly, I'd taken some mushrooms, and I was it was incredible that these little ordinary looking mushrooms, you mash them up, put them in a pot, and the sensory and psychological transformation you undergo, with on a trip, um, and the hallucinations was, it just blew my mind. Almost quite literally. As in, something mundane like a mushroom can cause such a transformation of perception. And so I married that, obviously, with this idea that, you know, yeah, that you could physically imagine if it could physically transform you, you know, in an incredibly powerful way. And then I began to think through, when I was devising Snakewood, what that would mean. You know, that it would mean that um, the best plant, you know, that would be, or the most powerful mushrooms, if you like, or the most powerful plants would, if they gave you more strength or more resistance to poison and this, that, and the other, then an army with that capability would beat an army of a lesser capability. And then I thought, well, that's really interesting, because now, you know, and insofar as an army sort of marches on these 5 brews as well as his stomach, the recipes for these would be, you know, kept hidden, because if my kingdom's got better recipes than yours, then I'm always going to beat your armies in a battle, because my troops are just much more powerful, and therefore I'm going to protect my recipes. And so they're more valuable than gold, and they're more valuable than crowns and, you know, treasures and stuff. And recipes become bartered. They become, you might sign peace agreements with a neighboring country, and part of that is the sharing of certain recipes. And I've realized that once you take the power of plant and extrapolate it to how that then affects culture and, you know, economies and politics and the military and everything, it shapes the whole world, and it shapes what everyone cares about, and it shapes how everything happens almost. And that was hugely exciting to me when I thought through those ramifications. That sounds like a great thing to build a world upon, and to explore with ideally soldiers, because they're the ones taking the 5 brews, and 5 brews are obviously very dangerous, and they ultimately destroy you and break you down, you know, like any hard drugs would, after, you know, especially ones which are so powerful. You know, there's a price to pay. And that was a very interesting thing from a storytelling point of view, is if you've got old soldiers, they're paying the color, as it says in the book. You know, they're paying a steep price for their service as soldiers to whichever army, or in case of mercenaries, to the purse, you know, in order to achieve their ends. You know, so how it affected people, and how it affected people's drives and ambitions and needs, you know, in the case of kings, right through to just ordinary soldiers looking for something to heal them, or to stop them from hurting so badly from the 5 brews they have to take. You know, it just felt very, very rich, and it yielded so much to explore as a writer, you know, of trying to create an interesting secondary world. So from all that, yeah, that's where and the fact that it was all organic and all that as well felt much more real, I guess, you know, and less having to suspend judgment with demons, angels, and magic rings and things.
It reminded me, there's like a medical, there is a medical, I guess, characteristic of this, because when they're healing, sometimes they're putting like an organism into them. Yeah. And so I found that very interesting as well. And there was one other thing. There's so much about that. I just really thought
I'd like it to be slightly yucky as well. The thought that you're putting wriggling, writhing things in, because of course that some of that will, you know, the idea that maggots clean wounds, you know, and stuff like that.
Yeah,
let's just leverage. Yeah, let's leverage that. You know, the idea that you can use this stuff to clean and heal. And I think I make use of people being. I know in Brother Red, I think she drowns the one character effectively, but in this stuff that foams and fizzes and stuff, but basically, you know, he heals, you know, sort of lung damage and other stuff like that. So again, that's slightly OTT, but I thought, yeah, it feels cool, you know, so don't worry too much about it being rigidly biologically accurate. You know, you just got to tell a cool story, and that helped to bind her to Bray, I think, is the character in Brother Red, that she gets him into shape to go out into the field with her, although he's not in much shape until much later in the novel. So yeah, I used a bit of that for that. Yeah.
I read paying the color as meaning the more, I guess, cadaver-like they look, or the more the more they lose their healthy skin characteristic, whether that means becoming more ashen or just skin
or more
changing.
colourful. Yeah, and it's partly to do with the fact that it changes your blood. So I like this idea that maybe instead of obviously when you hold your arms out, you can mostly see blue veins. I thought imagine they were black or some other green, some another usual color. I thought that would look, that's a change in color, but it would suffuse maybe the capillaries of your skin in other ways. But also they have skin rubs that are variously coloured as well, and so it was more prominent in snakewood. I think some of the richer and more. I like the idea that some of the more exotic fight brews would leave these stains in your skin and stuff because they're just transforming who you are, but also with the skin rubs that you put on to protect you from poisons, like barriers and stuff from spores and all the other nasty stuff. You become dyed. Like you say, you become grey, and I think the grey is the color that these particular fight brews that Druna is familiar with in this book. I think grey is predominant, but I think I do mention that there's a sandy coloured one in Snakewood. There's all kinds of colours. There's people with stripes and all kinds of crazy stuff, but most of it emanating from the veins and all that. So I like the idea that the sacrifice you've made is very visible in terms of your appearance, and it also means that it can't be faked. If you have the color, you're clearly a soldier, but given that paying the color is so dangerous that a fight brew can kill you in an instant if it's not mixed perfectly well. It's you look upon people who have paid the color or are paying the color, have the color with awe and fear, because they're obviously even when they're not actually on a fight brew and it's in the system and it's affecting them, they are transformed by it. Bone, whether it's bone density, muscle mass, whatever. There are lasting changes that make them, on top of all the training, incredibly formidable soldiers. Like super soldiers, even off a fight brew. And so you never go near someone who's clearly paid the color, but also the payment is, of course, the sacrifice you made. You pay the color, as in you're paying the price for the color and what it gives you with a fight brews, because it just breaks you down as both psychologically and physically. There's a passage I came across. I made a note in case it was any value in reading it, of her sort of just kind of telling the reader really the kind of damage that it does. I think there's a character, Courage, she counts 29 fight brews or whatever. She's taken 29 fight brews in her life, and he's taken over 50, and he screams himself to sleep and wakes up with nightmares. He's clearly not well and as it's kind of he's struggling. And so there's that whole thing then about soldiers caring for each other, because they lose their minds and otherwise need loads of help just getting their bodies set for the day because of the aches, pains, and all the problems that come with it all.
Very interesting.
Hello, Jonathan. I can see a comment's got up.
Yeah. Hello, Jonathan. Thanks for coming by. So the idea for the post you mentioned it kind of originated in Snakewood and Brother Red. Did you have the idea for what the story of Brother Red would be when you went into the book, or did it kind of come to you as you were writing it?
It came as I really struggled with it for a while. I got to thank my agent Jamie for pointing me in the right direction. I got to a point. So there's Druna and Cal, who were kind of who you meet initially, and it was originally Cal was the protagonist, and I was trying to come up with a plot and stuff, and it just wasn't working. I wasn't satisfied with it. It didn't feel right. It didn't feel sort of exciting, and I just couldn't get into it. And I couldn't figure out why. And so the months were going by, and I said, Jamie, can we meet up? I don't think I can do this. I don't think I can write this. I haven't got an idea, and I'm panicking. And so Jamie sat me down. And he said, well, okay. He said, they're both cool, but tell me about Cal. And so I told him Cal's backstory, which goes back to a short story I wrote years ago, which I will at some point rewrite properly and explain his link to Amaris and how he comes across Amaris, and how that's to do with his singing and everything. And yeah, he's got the disgraced noble father, the Lord Rolga, Barrel Rolga, and now his mum's now kind of been somehow forced into marriage with his his uncle. And Jamie's like, fine, fine, fine. Now tell me about Druna. I said, well, yeah, Druna's a sort of a refugee, and she's left her father and the family because they've become bandits and they've lost their way and they've gone against their culture. And I was just talking and talking and talking, and he just starts nodding. I said, yeah, Druna's way more interesting, and Druna is clearly the protagonist should be. She's just, there's more at stake. He basically said, there's more at stake for her. Her life is so very shaped by the traumas of her childhood on the run. And the way they were vilified as travelers, sadly to this day still are. In the UK and elsewhere. That they, sort of a clan, trying to find some place to settle, getting run off people's land all the time and blamed for everything, as outlaws. They eventually turn bad, and the struggle and desperation created with Druna this intense loyalty and love of her family, and particularly her mother, for all that she sacrificed. But at the same time, she hated what her father had become and rejected it and wanted something to believe in and chose the post. And of course, that it's slightly odd. And I think it's, there's certainly people in the book, Bray particularly early on says, what it's a merchant guild, are you nuts? But she's clinging on to something that purports to have some noble aim, which obviously Taya Amundsen in the Winter Road, that was her desire as well, that there be a company that do some good in the world. And so that core tension in her just was so fertile from the point of view of giving me then allowing me to work out what a journey with her would look like. A journey with her just looked a lot more interesting, compelling, and stuff than a journey where Cal is the one driving it all in terms of his drives and motivations and stuff. And so for that reason, I flipped to Druna. And then it all just got a lot easier. So the idea of the baby in the barrel was kind of, I can't remember where that came from, but I wanted to bring the Oscaro and then their kind of tribes, the other tribes that related the Associ. I wanted to bring them to the fore. I was really interested in having them a bit more in it, partly because I was getting some feedback. People who had read Winter Road and a little bit of Snakewood as well, but mostly the Winter Road were like, well, these Oscaros seem really cool. I mean, they got plant in them and plant growing out of them, and they're super powered, and they're just too cool not to have in a book. And I thought, no, you're right. Actually, I should try and bring them in. And so I thought we'll have the Master of Flowers in there, and the last surviving chief of the Oscaro tribe that Taya Amundsen made that initial pact with in the Winter Road, by gifting them the Flower of Fate seeds. And I thought, well, let's get the Flower of Fates back in, because that's just badass. It's a flower that one seed of which you can level an army. You can do all kinds of crazy things with. So I just wanted to amp it all up a bit in a way, and have them actually on the field like they were at the end of the Winter Road, but have them, getting stuck in with her more. And so all that kind of, I thought, well, if there's a baby there that's one of them, that's super precious, then I thought, well, that's obviously a valuable cargo. So that's a kidnapping. And I wanted a little bit of a whodunit. I wanted it to be her trying to discover what's going on, and I like this notion of her unpicking this trail and trying to find out who the real kind of the baddies are. And knowing that there's this other layer which gets explored now in the next lot of books I'm writing, I thought, well, let's have a magist, pop up. And because in the moment I thought that, I thought, well, it's an unkillable antagonist. She just cannot kill him. There's just no way. It's never going to happen. And I thought, well, that's actually interesting. What if you can't win? What do you do? And I thought, well, that to me was just like, that's an interesting storytelling challenge. Is when you realise she does, when she finds out, actually Litko is a magist, she's like, oh, I'm done then. Obviously, just run away. I can't win. But she chooses not to. For me, the challenge there was, how do you, just knowing you don't stand a chance, how would you just think, yeah, no, what, I'm going for it anyway. It doesn't matter. There's more at stake here than my well-being or survival or whatever, And so, yeah, this idea of a Pyrrhic victory, or continuing even though you can't win. I love that kind of doom-laden tragedy element of that. Obviously Tolkien's awesome at that. It probably during the initial draft of this, I think I had read The Children of Hurin, and it was super dark, and I thought, yes, I love this, this doom-laden kind of thing. And there's people who've read Brother Red at the end, they'll go, oh yeah, Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, I like it, so I like that as well. We've got Lorne. Lorne's here.
Yeah,
Hey,
our
Lorne.
friend Joao Silva's here.
And
Hey,
Joey, yeah.
Lauren, greetings. And Lauren is actually the one who recommended The Winter Road to me originally. So thank you, Lauren.
Yeah.
So it sounds like she wasn't meant to be the Brother Red originally. I really like that Brother Red ended up being a woman. It flipped my expectations.
Yes. So I can't remember if I'd had the title Brother Red at the time I thought it was Cal. I loved the title, and when you come up with a title you love, you instantly go on Google because you're thinking, oh, please let it not be the title of, George R. R. Martin's next book or something, which you've like, oh, I can't, something you obviously cannot use or have, or the title for, come up with like The Philosopher's Stone, which was a book title I had at one point. It was like, okay, I could see someone called J.K. Rowling's done this, so that was a bit frustrating. But so when Brother Red worked, and then I thought, well, actually, so it became Druna. I thought, well, I could keep it, couldn't I? I like the idea that, again, a patriarchal world, a male-centric world, that how would she get called Brother Red? And there's a sense of brothers as in brotherhood, which for all that it's kind of male in terms of the nature of the word, as a kind of universal kind of meaning of togetherness and stuff. I liked that anyway. And then I think the opportunity came when I was plotting out the first, when she goes out into the Sathanti Peaks the first time, realizes that the Hidzuks are going to, funded by Mag Oster, are going to go and try and take the Ilkishan out on the Canonry land. I'm glad I read it 2 days ago. So I can remember all these bits now. Remind myself of all these bits. When she helps Yika to fend them off and kills the Hidzuk chief, Iraq, I think he calls her his brother or something like that, and the meaning of it for him is brotherhood, partner, fellow, if you like. But she's like, yeah, well, cool, I don't have a penis actually, but fine if you want to call me a brother. And so I thought, well, there's a way in which that mistake of his could stick and become a thing. They all call her Brother Red in reference to that kind of the way he'd referred to the Reds as brothers, even though she obviously was key to winning the battle and was a woman. And so like Lorne said, I liked that flip, that Brother Red is kind of about a woman, and I just thought that's cute. I'll keep that. I kind of like it. And I didn't think any more about it because it meant that I could keep a title that I was really enamored of,
I think it's also interesting because not only is she a woman, but she's transforming into something else. So,
yes.
So it's not so much a binary type of thing, but there's something else she's transforming into, but the name is still her and her journey story. Yeah, but I was surprised too, in a good way. I enjoyed that.
Yeah, and then the others, because of course I think it gets referenced a few other times then later in the book, and then it just sticks. I think there's one point where she comes across a group when they're going to attack the spike towards the end, and they're like, "Oh, it's Brother Red," and they're all going, "Oh, yes, Brother Red, calm down, everyone. Because she's become a bit of an icon and all that. Good afternoon to Wayne, one of my good friends from back home in Wales. Wayne has joined.
Thanks, Brian.
Something else, speaking of Cal and Drina,
Druna, I call her.
Druna,
Yeah.
okay, Druna, and Ufra. Did I have that name right?
Ufra, yeah.
Ufra, yeah. So, that was an interesting relationship, and I
Yeah.
almost saw it as emotionally polyamorous.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
first we have Drina and Cal, and they're very close, but they realize, they're not really attracted to each other. And then, of course, she meets Ufra and has this just incredible experience, bonding experience with her, which was an intimate experience as well. The thorns and
Yeah.
kind of implanting something in her, and so very interesting. But then Cal kind of comes back in, and it becomes a a partnership of three, a relationship of three, although they're both centered on Drina.
Yeah.
But Ufra and Cal seem to be bringing each other kind of into the circle. I mean, they're both accepting each other as part of this circle. So I thought that was just a really interesting way of setting up the relationship. And it was believable. And Cal was giving Drina room to transform. I mean,
Yeah.
he
Yeah.
wasn't saying, "Oh, you're becoming somebody I don't know anymore." He was accepting of that transformation.
Yeah. Druna and Cal, they absolutely love each other. And obviously, in the first couple of pages, I set out that initially they thought there was a sexual attraction, but it was one of those. I thought, wouldn't it be? It was too obvious, and I thought, well, wouldn't it be nice if there was, they realized that actually they were just kind of soulmates in that kind of platonic way. And so I thought, wouldn't it be funny if they tried to sort of make out, when she gets into his bedroll or whatever, but I think he falls and he elbows her in the face, and then she tips and hits him, and it's all this totally awkward, and it's almost like they real I chose that to kind of very quickly, get them to realize, you know what, actually this isn't what we wanted, is it really? We just
Mhm.
love each other. We're just soulmates. We're just cool.
Mhm.
And obviously, it not being two girls, I thought, well, that's cool. She's got a male soulmate. I've I've said in other interviews as well. Obviously, you may not have seen them, Layla. That one one very influential thing in terms of how soldiers relate to each other is, I got from both learning how miners, going down the coal mines and all that, when they come back up, they're obviously so black with coal dust that they, in the showers, I believe, I think this is true, they would wash each other. They'd have to, because they couldn't get the dirt out, themselves. So there's a very intimate physical experience between miners who risk their lives every day going down the mines. There's that aspect of camaraderie and togetherness, and then there's that intimate, almost grooming of it. It's not grooming of each other, but that kind of caring for each other in a very physically intimate sense, in a very macho culture. The miners and all that was, the women would just be at home, and the men would work, and the men were the bringing home the bacon kind of thing, and yet they were very, very physically intimate in a yeah, non-amorous, non-sexual way. And I loved that intimacy. And I had a very marginal experience of it. I was working in a tire factory in Stoke-on-Trent, and we had to get into these trays full of oil, because the big steel rollers that roll the rubber out, they would have rubber stuck to them, and every so often you just have to get people under the rollers, just scraping, physically pulling rubber off, and you just get covered. And after we'd done that shift, that first shift, the supervisor said, I don't want to put it to you, but you're going to need to wash each other. Probably, you're probably not going to get it all out on your own, so it's up to you. But it might help to do that. And me and this guy kind of looked at each other and thought, well, I'm all right with it if you are. And he was like, yeah, okay. don't tell the missus. You have that kind of a bit of awkward, I'm totally uncomfortable here, and then you just get on with it. But it was quite powerful, just washing another man's back, a complete stranger's back. It was, what was I was 20, 19, 20. It was, yeah. So thinking about that, and then the minors, I just thought, so when it comes to the skin rubs and everything, I thought, well, that's cool, because there'll be an intimacy anyway between Cal and Druna, because they're very familiar with bathing together, or otherwise using the grits, as they call them, and the brushes to get all the rubs off the skin, so it doesn't poison and damage the skin. And so that the fact that has to be so thorough means that they're very physically intimate anyway. And so it created this. I loved that dynamic. Like, again, I once it flowered in my head as a thing that I could explore, I was delighted, because I've got exactly what you said, Layla. I've got that kind of those two soulmates, but they only want the best for each other. They just love each other in that kind of you're my rock kind of thing. And then she falls in totally unexpectedly in love with Ufra, and is transformed, and undergoes the transformation. But of course, Cal wouldn't want anything but for Druna to be incredibly happy. And there is a scene where he's a little bit kind of, but the thorns, they make you want them. To what extent is this voluntary? To what extent is there consent here? Was just something I touched on just slightly, but she's pretty clear that, and again, I have to be pretty clear, because obviously that's an area you need to sort of be careful of, or understand thoroughly, that there was true consent there, because otherwise I don't think you have the basis for the falling in love and the emotional bond that comes alongside the connection that the thorns make. But when they make that connection, they're both super high on the master's blood, which is effectively a fight brew par excellence, that has none of the downsides. It's just ultra hyper real clarity. And so for her, she feels that she saw right into Ufra's soul and loved every ounce of it, and just thought, this is just completely right. And I think Ufra felt the same when she looked at Druna. So in a way, the master's blood created the shortcut to them both realizing, what, everything about you, the whole down to the core of your being that I'm seeing with this hyperreal perception is just pure beauty, and I just want you. I want to be with you and around you. And there was an infatuation there as well. I've had the odd criticism when I've bothered to read reviews from time to time. Someone said, "Oh, love at first sight." I don't buy it. It's that's because you haven't been captivated by someone, at first sight. I remember vividly it happening once when I was a teenager, just standing on Cardiff railway station. I've been into town shopping. I think I got a couple of Pink Floyd albums. That was my Pink Floyd phase. And I remember, I remember it vividly. I'm on the station with my little bag of Pink Floyd albums, and the doors to the train open that I'm about to get on, and this girl just walks off, and I lost my mind. I mean, I remember staring after her, perplexed, completely speechless. I thought, do I run after it? Do I get on the train? What do I do? I couldn't think for a moment, and I recalled that with Druna, and it was a pain in the backside, because Ufra wasn't in the book. So when Druna goes out to meet the chief with Bray, I thought, well, there'll be an associate there, and that's how she'll, because he's chasing the baby after all, and all that kind of stuff, the Oscaro baby. I thought there should be an associate there so that they can start that whole thing. And as I was writing the sentence of Ufra stepping off the horse, I just thought, they're going to fall in love. It just, I think that happens a lot with writers, that you do have your plot, and then something will come along that will just feel right, but completely mess your plot up, because of course Ufra was not in the rest of the plot that I'd sketched out. But I just knew she'd fall in love with her. I just thought they're going to fall in love. I just know it. As soon as she looks at her, she's done. She's had it. I don't know whether I subconsciously recalled that moment on Cardiff Station back in the day, but then it happened, and I just started writing it, and it felt right. and it felt interesting because at the moment that thought jumped in, I was thinking about Cal, and I thought actually this could be very cool. This kind of, you know, the dynamic here could be really interesting, but really warm, because for me, Druna brings people together. Druna inspires people, and I love the idea that, you know, whoever comes across Druna feels drawn to her. And so if you like Ufra being drawn to it in a romantic way, and you got Cal as the kind of the soulmate, you're my rock way, I thought there's a lot of love in that triangle,
Mhm.
and a lot of strength and positivity there, which maybe wasn't in Snakewood. And I just thought it allows me to amplify that in a, like you say, in a very interesting way, rather than just be, you know, a person and the one they love, you know.
And I liked actually how the relationship, it wasn't perfect. Druna did make one mistake in releasing the captive slaves,
Yeah.
thinking they would aid them, but actually it was ended up being a drawback, and
Yeah.
very painful one for Ufra. So you know, I thought that was realistic, and it helped add some realism
Yeah.
to that thing, you know, because in any relationship, yeah, you're going to go in at first thinking everything is, you know, rosy, but then something will happen here or there. And that definitely wasn't a little something, but slip ups happen, and then people have to reevaluate,
Yeah.
you know, who are we? What is this relationship? So I thought that was really good.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah.
So did you talk to the girl at Cariff Station, or what did you do?
That's all anyone wants to know now. Who was she? I didn't. I well, to a lesser extent, I'm still quite insecure. I was so insecure as a teenager. There's no way I could actually introduce myself to a strange, beautiful girl that I did, you know, the beautiful girl I didn't know. There's just no way. But unlike so many other opportunities where maybe you're in a bar with a drink and you think, oh, you know, she's attractive. This is many years ago, incidentally. Just lets me think. Yeah, I actually thought about it. I was so perplexed. I actually thought, is this one of those things? Is this straight out of a movie? Do I run after her and ask for a coffee? I just didn't know what to do with myself. You know, it was bonkers. But no, I got on the train and sat down in a huff, really upset with myself for lacking the confidence to just go after it and just see. Yeah, never mind.
Um, so I had a couple other
Yeah,
things to just comment on, think about. Actually, a question. I will say at the end, after the Master of Flowers died, I might have misread it, and I was actually looking this morning. But was there another master that emerged, that was, or was I, you know, was I just reading memories of the former Master of Flowers?
I'm trying to think now. After the Master of Flowers dies, they're just behind the dock. The buildings all kind of crash down. There's this like huge explosion. Effectively, this
Yeah.
titanic force as Litko basically tries to tear them apart. On the docks, they come across Scar,
Uh-huh.
and Scar is obviously was someone who was going to become a master but wasn't deemed worthy at the last minute, and that's why Scar killed all his elders and has become, you know, a tool for Litko. I'm trying to think now because I actually read that today. Is it while they're on the
That
docks?
may
Because
have,
there's a
yeah,
yeah
that may
yeah no
be where I had a little bit of misunderstanding as to if someone had taken the master's place, but maybe I'll have to go back to and look and see
yeah
what
no
Scott
one
had
would
said. But
have taken the master's place. So he was the I know in where they're having a conversation about whether they should or shouldn't go to Autumn's Gate and try and stop what's happening, or at least try and do some damage. He says he's the last, you know, and I think Ufra asks whether it's possible he could go do the procedure for her so that she could, at least with her father having died at the slave camp, the experimentation camp, the torture camp, whether she could become the master for her tribe and protect them. But they realize the choice they have to make. There's kind of no point. They're going to take on Litko, and they know that they're probably not going to come out of it. So you then know that there's no master for the Associ or the Oscoro. They were implored, I think the master implored them at one point to head south to Casgul's Landing, where I think there'll be other Associ tribes, and then further south to the Hanwok jungle, which is prominent in Snakewood, where one of their kind of sister tribes, as it were, it exists, in a slightly different form. So there would be other masters out there of their own tribes, but the Oscoro and the Associ lost theirs in this book.
And that leads me to the other question about the Associ and Oscoro. And these may have been the previous books, but are they of the same culture? They seem to be, but maybe different. I'm thinking more of like patriarchal tribes, or tribes that will be a tribe under one name and a tribe under another name, but similar culture. Or what are the similarities and differences?
I have no idea. I just, as in, I haven't thought about it enough. I've called them Oscoro and Associ. Where the name Oscoro came from, I haven't actually thought about. It was a way of delineating two tribes who have common practices around the way they would use plant and put plant into their bodies and change their bodies, swap skin out and various other bits and pieces. Not patriarchal, because the baby that kicks it off as a girl, but she had been prepared to grow up with a flower of fates in her brain lock, as they call them in the book. So there would be a leader that would have the flower of fates, and be influenced by that and kind of lead the tribe in that way. But yeah, the only kind of things they really have in common is that they are evolved over many generations to have plants living and kind of working with them, and being part of their bodies in different ways. And so beyond that, I hadn't thought about any other. I reference, I know the one cultural practice, one of them folds the skin when they expose the brain to put the seed in, and one of them just cuts it and leaves it. And I thought, well, that was just a little bit of an allusion, I tried to use a particular example to suggest that there are different approaches to the same problem, kind of thing, that different tribes will evolve. But there wasn't really scope in the book anyway, I don't think, to go too deep on the tribes from a world building point of view. They were on the run and all that. I liked to keep a little bit of mystery about who they were and how they did their things anyway. So it's a little bit of all of that I think would have caused me not to sit down and put a huge load of backstory in for the Oscoro or the Associ. I just know that they exist in pockets, that there'll be connections between the tribes, but not necessarily. I don't think there's any overall culture or any more clear delineation in my head. Although it's a great avenue to go down. I might just make a little note to think more about that, because I'm sure there'll be lots of cool stuff within that.
Yeah, and the baby actually, I thought that was a great tool for suspense, because I was waiting to not only find out who had killed the baby, but also, was the baby supposed to be dead? Like, was that part of it? Because I'm a brand new reader to the world and not really knowing what's come before, if anything has. My one thought was, did they kill the baby on purpose so that the seed would grow better? But I did read about the stabbing, and then just the mystery of not only who killed the baby, but what were they trying to do, and so learning over time, meeting Ufra and kind of putting two and two together that there must be something related here, so it's not all bad that they put a seed in the baby's brain. So I thought it was a really good way of the tying the plot together.
Yeah,
Have a suspense.
it was I'm conscious we got a few questions as well, which we'll hopefully get to in the chat. But in relation to the baby, in thinking about how she died, they would have wanted to keep her alive in the same way that this is Litko and Scar and but basically Litko and the Druidas that he had experimenting on people, which is why all the kidnappings were taking place and why it was causing all that problem in the Sathanti Peaks, which was Druna was thinking, why are they all not talking to each other? Why is there no council? Why are all these kidnappings? What's going on? There's something clearly wrong in the state of Denmark. And they had obviously, Scar had gone after the Oscoro with Litko because they would have been well aware of the Oscoro from the Post and the fact that there were good relations between them and from Taya Amundsen's time. But only someone of Scar and Litko's capability could take them down because they're so powerful. And so there's that moment where they ambush them, they realize they're not really going to get away. The Master of Flowers gets away. And obviously he then crops up in the actual book, but the mother with the future master sees them and realizes, yeah, you want this baby, so I'm going to kill my own child, to stop you from being able to experiment or use this child. It's too sacred. It's simply something you must never have. It's better that she dies. Holding that baby, when there was the scene where Druna breaks open the barrel and thinks, what's this, and pulls a baby out, would be obviously immensely powerful. It's just it's so awful and tragic, and to see that the baby was murdered as well. But there's a point where when she thinks about the baby subsequently, and the Master of Flowers references it, there's this connection that's been created. The Master of Flowers smells the baby on her, even though the baby's long gone from her. She realizes she needs to bring the baby to the light. The baby was drowned in darkness in the barrel, and she needs to find the baby to bring the baby on. So she says that explicitly. But there's a point where she thinks about the baby and realizes it had to have been the mother that killed the baby, because of the peacefulness of the baby's face. And so that sacrifice hits Druna here. And I think then there's a oh god, what's the other point? There was another point where they ask Druna why she's doing what she's doing, and she explicitly thinks back to the baby and that act and realizes, why are you here? I'm here because of love. And I'd leave it deliberately vague as to whether it's her love of this baby she's fallen in love with, wants to love, wants to hold and caress, and but obviously the mother's love that killed the baby, and stuff like that. But it was a way of taking a step back and just saying, getting Druna to ask of herself, what are my motivations here? Why am I doing any of this? Why am I out in the Sathanti Peaks chasing this thing down when I've got other things to do as the fieldsman of the Post? And it's love. It's as simple and as plain as that.
It's actually a page I had tabbed. It's page 279 that she says, it's love that brings me here at the end of that chapter. So yeah. And we'll get to the questions in the chat here in just a second. I just wanted to ask you about Scar, because similar to the Winter Road, we build up these villains and we don't see them for a while. We just hear about them. We hear people talking about them, and that builds kind of this anticipation of what's going to happen when we really find out who this person is, or what their powers are, or how is it really a person? Or so is that intentional for you to kind of have characters discuss a villain or discuss a character that kind of off screen that we don't see for a while, kind of to build that tension?
Well, this one, I introduced and I realized that the way the plot. So if I go to Litko for a moment, I realized who, knowing who Litko was, it was a shape changer that was basically high up in the post and was manipulating Stroff and so on. I thought, well, actually, in the plot, she doesn't have any idea who the antagonist is, and that's not necessarily a good thing. You've got the antagonist and protagonist, and they just don't meet for 200-300 pages. What's she doing? So I needed to use the conceit of those chapters where Litko is talking about his plans to help the reader understand. She has no idea what she's up against, and she has no idea that all this is going on, and that she's going to uncover all this hopefully and kill the baddie. But at the same time, if you've read The Winter Road and Snakewood, you're thinking, well, this Litko character, this magist, this talk of multitudes and refoing and the ability to shape change is utterly unlike anything else in those other books, so she kind of doesn't stand a chance. But obviously they're of necessity in the shadows. There's a very big there's a reason for that which gets explored, shall we say, in future books, like the reason for Litko and to some extent Lorem Hallowim, who is the magist that they say, oh, praise Hallowim and stuff like that. Hallowim's obviously he's after Hallowim, Lorem Hallowim. He's trying to tease him out with what he's doing, because it's really about taking out Lorem Hallowim, who doesn't even appear in the book. There's a war going on that's just way above, where Druna and that's operating. But what she successfully does, her triumph, if you like, is to be a mortal that is so effective and annoying that she actually can irk and force, a change in plans, or otherwise destroy the plans of a many thousand-year-old entity. So I kind of loved that about it. And then at the same time, when I was thinking about, I can't remember how Scar came about. She meets Scar early on, doesn't she? The wagon comes back. Maybe at the time I was thinking, well, I need something that's going to stop her from chasing this wagon. So what would stop her from chasing the wagon? And I thought, I just had this. Then somehow there's this idea that there's someone like the Master of Flowers, someone quite formidable, who, and I thought, well, what kind of person could I make this? And it's, yeah, they're just hooded. They have this very. I was inspired of all people, Mike Tyson. When it came to the voice, the soft voice like soft sand over hot stone or something, I was always, when you saw Tyson, it was the classic metaphor as a wrecking ball in the ring. Tyson was so powerful and savage in the ring in his prime. He was frightening. He was truly fearsome. People, he cut this such a terrifying figure. In terms of how unstoppable he was, his aggression, his power, his capability. I loved the fact that with Tyson, he was also a scholar of boxing. He watched all the old videos of the old pros. He immersed himself in that world. And then when he opens his mouth, he's got this sweet, soft, kind of, I don't know if he's got a lisp or anything, but he's got that very kind of very soft and almost higher pitched voice. He's higher on the scale, whatever the register, whatever the words is. And there was almost a contradiction there. Certainly as a teenager, I thought it was, you're expecting, you associate macho with deep. And yet Tyson spoke so sort of sweetly when he's in interview, and then he puts the gloves on and he's an absolute beast. And I loved that kind of juxtaposition was kind of cool, and it stuck in my mind. And so when it came to Scar, I thought there's someone who's incredibly physically potent because they're effectively an associate or akin to one. But let's not give them this big booming voice, because again, let's not do the obvious. And I thought, well, Mike Tyson, there's this soft, and what I liked about it was there's so many. I'm sure you've had it in your lives. There are people who can speak very gently, and you can't they completely take your focus, and they're speaking softly and gently and stuff, but they have you on the edge of your seat.
Yeah.
So I like that. I thought that works better for a giant. There's a juxtaposition there, a kind of a sweetness, a stillness. It supported this notion of a surety of this giant. I think at one point she says he's already moved on. Like she goes to have a bit of banter with him, and it's like he's not there. He's gone still. It's like this is already finished for me. Actually, like you are so little, and I like that that not no threats, no aggression, just stillness. Like you have to leave this, and you get it with really good bouncers, on nightclubs and stuff. There's just this calm, easygoing. It's all cool. Come on, let's all stop now. And they're just all this. It's all about defusing and all that, but at the same time, it's like, let's not open that door, shall we? We don't want to open that door, do we? You or me, we don't want to open that door. And I love that about true threat. I always remember a story like I was having a drink with my dad in a pub in Carrickston in Barry, where I grew up, called the Admiral, and it was a rough. It's gone now, but it's a really rough pub. And I remember going to the bar to get me and my dad a drink, and I'd knocked into the back of some guy, and oh, sorry mate, and he went, oh yeah, no problem, sorry, yeah, cool. And I sat back down with a pint, and my dad said, see that guy there you just knocked? I said, yeah, he's one of the hardest guys you could ever meet, one of the most frightening guys in a fight. He said, I've seen him, beating people, I've got going crazy. Like he was obviously a real hard nut, a real hard character, but he didn't want any trouble, because they don't. The really frightening people, the last thing they want is to open that door. And I always remember that, that it's just like, yeah, no problem, it's all cool. There's no problem, is there? No. Okay. Because if you want a problem, it goes bad real quick, kind of thing. And I love that kind of, that peace, that inner kind of, I know I'm who I am, so it's all good. So I love that about Scar. And then but the antagonists in this book, I think this is what you're getting at, Steve. They're not really around a lot. She doesn't think. It gave me the opportunity, of course, in setting up someone so powerful, both Scar and Litko, for you to think, well, how are they going to? When you're introduced to the Master of Flowers, I'm hoping the reader's thinking as I was. I now want the readers to think, I want to see the Master of Flowers take on Scar, and then of course the Master of Flowers does take on Litko. And you want to see that. You want the big hitters going into the ring together, kind of, however briefly. And so there's that key moment in the torture camp where Druna and the Master of Flowers see Scar, and Scar knows, like, okay, I'm good, but I'm not I'm not Master of Flowers good, and I think he scoots off. But their confrontation is there, and it's that power struggle. I was looking forward to writing that scene. That was pretty cool.
And we did have a question from Jonathan. Does art imitate life, or the other way around?
Oh, it's reflexive, recursive, for sure. I mean, these anecdotes from the miners to me getting my back scrubbed in Stoke-on-Trent, to knocking the shoulders of extremely hard individuals in rough pubs. There's so much of all three books where you're drawing on life, or what you've read or what you've experienced, stories you've been told. Absolutely. The girl on the train and all that kind of stuff. I'm always looking for that from everywhere. I think it's as easy as that. Recursive and reflective. They feed in and out of each other, because with the relationship, with the key relationship in the book, Druna and her mum and her dad, mum and pappy, that is all. That's just family. I mean, it's not saying that that's what my relationship with my family is like. There is some conflict in my in my family, and there's not something to go into, but you could say that some of the energy there is reflected in some of that conflict, for sure. But you and equally, when I'm writing about Druna picking that baby's body out of the barrel, being a father, holding a baby, and loving my children, and thinking about the unimaginable loss, that would, if you'd lost one of them, that powers and fuels what you choose to say. And even though Druna wasn't a mother, nevertheless, there's this, there's a level on which that's a very powerful moment to think carefully about how do you communicate that power across? How do you communicate the huge effect it has on Druna that drives every decision she makes thereon? So I'm definitely would draw then on, how powerful to hold up a child, living ideally, like mine thankfully have been, and but you know what I mean. That what just gets you there, that gut thing. Yeah, pull that out. Yeah, how can I weave that into a connection between her and this baby that she feels this huge sorrow and pity and for.
And Wayne had a question. I've heard other writers say that characters have lives of their own. How often did you find when writing Brother Red or your other books did the characters start derailing the plot?
Yeah, so the key one, as I said earlier, was definitely Ufra just appearing. As soon as Ufra stepped off the horse, it was like the door opening on the train. It was like, okay, Druna's done. She's smitten, and that derailed the whole plot. In a way, it obviously enriched the story. I think it gave me a lot more opportunities, as I've outlined. Yeah, you have this idea, don't you, with writers? There's the pantsers, as it were. They just simply get going, and they'll throw 50,000 words away and write another 50 until they get it right. Then there's the architects, I think, where they've got everything planned out to the nth degree. And then there's the gardeners, I think they're called, where they just have a plot and they just work it up into something beautiful. I'm somewhere between an architect and a gardener, or rather, I think I'm an architect, but you end up realizing you're really a gardener because these things do happen. Or it's with me. It's not so much characters particularly derailing the plot. It's more that I get to a point where I now want them to go and do this thing and it doesn't feel right for them, or it's actually nowhere near as cool or interesting as I thought it was. So sometimes it's the plot, the things that I'm asking them to do to get from A to B to C to D that sound good on paper, and then you write it on paper. So it's a weird metaphor there. Sounds good on paper, sounds good in theory, and then when you write it, you realize actually this is a bit dull. Like, so for example, the letters in The Winter Road was a classic where I just realized that telling the story of the rest of Taylor Amundsen's life when it's just doing deals is pretty dull, so I needed to really think about what those letters contained and what they were about, and it was about that evolving and kind of maturing, and at the same point decaying relationship between her and her ex. In Brother Red, Ufra is obviously the main thing that messed it up. The key scene that I struggled with from the point of view of thinking about what the characters should and shouldn't do, and this was a great bit of feedback from my editor, was the parley in the Spike, where you've got on the one side, Litko's walked in with Mag Oster, Lord Mag Oster, Yasmich Mag Oster, and you've got Grislatic there, obviously he's this bully and this beast, and then you've got the Sathanti Peaks Kirch leaders, the Daith News, and they've all got grievances, and they all want their compensation for the lost slaves and this, that, and the other. And she had said that, like, I'd wanted to write the scene because it was important to me that Druna didn't just get the sword out every time to solve a problem, that actually wit and her leveraging relationships, that there's a way through this, that you can work it out. I was again, back to Jonathan's question, I think there was a British politician, Mo Mowlam, who was instrumental in the negotiations for the Good Friday Agreement. And there was one memorable point in one of the negotiations. There was a standoff between the conflicting parties, and she was undergoing chemo at the time, and she took her wig off and threw it on the table, exasperated with them, all the people around the table, and of course that gave a roar of laughter, but it injected, it obviously was a brilliant move in some ways, because not only did it lighten the mood at a very difficult point in the talks and in the negotiations, but it was also a moment to reflect on, there's some heavier stuff going on in here for some of these people, you know, and all that, you know, and there's some, it just gives you a bit of perspective. It changes the flavor of the meeting in a way. And I just thought it was, whether she judged it or whether it was genuine exasperation, you know, I don't know. Or maybe I'll have to read the memoirs maybe to find out where she was coming from. But that notion that a woman can be in a man's world effectively, you know, there's a lot of, you know, kind of traditional politicians there. I think I can't remember who would have been around the table, but obviously very hard men. And there's this woman there trying to, you know, who wasn't Irish. I think she's British, you know, on the British side, but trying to facilitate it. And yet she helped to forge an understanding, you know, between factions, which, you know, as everyone knows, with the Northern Ireland is, you know, is the terrorism and the bloodshed and the bombings, you know, it's a very, very difficult thing to bring peace to Northern Ireland. The Good Friday Agreement's, you know, obviously an incredible thing, I think, you know, from what I know and what I've read, of course. And so I that was in my mind in that scene, you know, how true is that? But when my editor read it, Jenny, she said it's really boring. They're just talking and then it ends. And you're thinking, oh, okay, well, that's how I wanted it to be, because I wanted to solve a problem without swords, you know. She goes, I get it, you know, you need to go back and think about some of the character motivations. So then I had to look at some of the minor characters maybe and how they might react. The tension, I had to up the tension in the room, and that meant that some characters changing their personality somewhat. And it then helped to introduce this power struggle between, I think his name was Korba, and Lusla Hidzuk. Iraq Hidzuk had died, and she was meant to be the chief. And I thought, well, there's a great opportunity here that maybe her warlords, her kind of lieutenants, and sure, she's up to the job, you know, this woman, you know, can she do Iraq's job? You know, I'm not sure she should be representing us. And I thought, well, there's a great chance there to exploit some of that concern, both from the other party, but then have both Lusla and Druna kind of, you know, pull it off, you know, and come through and create the peaceful solution. But it involved, you know, a bit of fisticuffs, I think, at one point, and it could have all gone wrong. So I just created more of a pivot point where the next thing someone said could change it all. So yeah, so sorry, Wayne. They when I think of characters, stuff can come to me about their lives, which is you don't know where it comes from, but by the time they're in the plot and they're doing the things I need them to do, they're pretty well formed. But how they come to be, and in terms of personality, character makeup, their backstories, that can fly in from absolutely nowhere. Absolutely.
Jonathan commented, I'm going to approach her with my best impression of James Dean.
James Dean. Oh, the girl on the train.
And,
yeah.
Yeah, and see where it goes from there.
Do it, Jonathan. Honestly, don't do a me. If you're captivated, you know.
And Wayne had another question. Do you have the geography of the setting mapped out, or do you create locations and place them as and when they're needed?
Oh, it's all beautifully mapped out. Yeah, it's all mapped. It all has to be mapped out. I'm a big fan of Tolkien in that regard. I learned subsequently. I went to, there's a wonderful exhibition at which it would have been Oxford, I think, the one college, and they did an exhibition of showing all Tolkien's, like his own artwork and his notes and things, and, you know, paraphernalia, memorabilia, and there was a notepad with, it basically looked like Excel. He'd gridded it out, and to the day, he had down the one side all the, you know, the Frodo and Sam, Aragorn, and you Aragorn, Legolas. So it's the two towers, I think, when they're chasing after Pippin and Merry, and each day he's tracked exactly where they are in relation on their journeys to make sure that the events of the novel happen according to the exact number of leagues and things, you know, unlike season 8 of Game of Thrones, right? You know, they or I understand from someone I saw on Twitter today that the new series Rings of Power, where they get from Eregion to Mordor in 6 days or something. Yeah. Tolkien had mapped it out, you know, thoroughly. I needed to do that anyway, because again, a bit like the architect thing, I needed the structure. I will say briefly, so Brother Red, unlike the other two, doesn't have a map in it. there is one on my website, adrianselby.com, that I provided, I believe. I'm sure I provided it in time, but unlike the other books, it didn't make it to the inside cover. I acknowledge that it's going to be hugely confusing, some of the, you're trying to place it all out. But yeah, if you go to the writing section of adrianselby.com and go to Brother Red, you'll see a huge map on that page. That would have been the one that would have gone into the book cover. So I need to know where everything is, and particularly in relation to this book, where they've got to go to the Sathanti peaks of the mountains at the same time as this plan to grow all these mutant soldiers and send them off to depose the king. But she has a couple of visits to her clan in the Redditch Fen. She goes to Linder. That she's going round a lot of places, and I felt like I needed to know how many days and weeks is all that, so I can pitch it into the calendar, so I know when it's going to snow and things like so. That need for it to be grounded and embedded rather than just made up, So yeah, so you will go through. I think it takes place over 6 months, the book, something like that, and so you do get at one point, yeah, they're walking through snow, and then it thaws and goes to spring again. I can't quite remember, but it's something like that. So yeah, I need to plant it into the seasons and make sure that all the journeys check out. Yeah.
Yes, and our friend Aaron is here. Hey, Al, where did the ideas for the Post's creed come from?
Corporate value statements. I love them. Corporate vision statements. I've worked at BP. I've worked at Tesco, which is a big UK supermarket if you're on the UK, the equivalent to say Walmart or something like that. I now work at Warner Brothers. I've worked at EA. Worked for Zynga, as game studios, and all of them have value statements. So they have your C-suite, your executive layer, your CEOs, and all these people that have you contribute to corporate values exercises. But it fascinates me because it's easy to be negative about them, and with good reason in many cases, because if you've got a company that's 10,000 people, how can a set of values that are derived by a handful speak to everyone in every role? It's very, very difficult. I happen to think that actually, like in Warner Brothers, where we've got multiple game studios, we've devised our own vision and values, because I'm a big fan of vision and values, but only in the sense that they're personal enough that your team see you live them. It's difficult for my team to see David Haddad or David Zaslav, who runs Warner, living those values. There's no connection between their day and his day. But if my team see I behave in a certain way, and that the reason I behave in that way is because I value this and I value that and value the other, which I think will create a positive and great work environment, they can see the behavior rather than the statement on the wall. And so that's all very interesting to me. Again, talking about the recursive stuff, you go back to something like the Post, which is Taya Amundsen wanted to drive a road across the circle, and so she never intended to create a world-spanning cross between the Catholic Church and the mafia at all. She wanted to create trade because trade brought prosperity, and so she, and there's a very old-fashioned kind of what they call, I think they call it stakeholder capitalism, which is that if a company exists in an area and is employing people and making money, that it gives back, it provides. A lot of, I'm really into my coffee, for example, and a lot of the one of the places that I buy my coffee from, fair trade, the guy who runs that, Steve, I think if it's still Steve, he goes out to the farms and he goes and visits, it's Ecuador and all these other places, the various countries in Africa and stuff where they grow, and West Coast I think is quite prominent when it comes to coffee beans. But he'll go to the farms and he'll look to see how they care for their workers, and a lot of them, being the main employer in the area, will then with the profits create schools and provide education for the children of the people that work there and all this kind of stuff. So I liked that idea that there's a leader of, that Taya Hamilton had this notion that she could do something like that. It's just like, not just make money. I mean, yeah, well, make money. I've made money. I'm rich. It's about now doing something worthwhile, like creating prosperity for as many people as possible. So a more philanthropic maybe approach to capitalism. And so then obviously in Snakewood, it's, and that's why I wanted to write The Winter Road. It starts there, but you've just read Snakewood. If you had read Snakewood first, because it was first published, and you think, well, it's become this awful thing, this hugely corrupt, massive organization with all its own politics and stuff like that. And, and Druna's story is pitched in the middle. It's a tipping point, where they realize what's at stake and what could be lost, and the reason that that's happening, which is to do with Litco. And so again, I'd referenced the Falsgrad Creed in Snakewood, and with Brother Red, I thought, oh God, I've actually got to come up with it now, because I referenced that there was a creed that no one cares about anymore. But what is the creed? And why does no one live by the creed? And so I came up with what is it? Peace through trade. Oh God, I read this just today.
I was just looking for it too, because it did make an impression. I do think,
but in the book, it's easy to mock. They mock it in the book. They're like, "Oh, the creed, give it a rest." You're like, no one cares. But she's like, but surely, that we could be like this. No, help the helpless, peace through trade. Yeah.
And she, she believes in that. And after, after what you've mentioned about her family and so on, I see even more that she needed that. She needed to believe in that. And I also thought it was great that it was focused around commerce. It wasn't a military creed, I found that just very unique and interesting too.
Yeah, I know that I've had someone, I think one of my subscribers actually, guy Darren Sharma, had said that, I think it was Darren, he'd said that the one thing he appreciated about the books was the importance and prevalence of commerce in them. That when you think about, a medieval world or whatever, like there's a lot of stories that seem to ignore just how money is made. But for me, commerce, trade, making a living, buying, selling, all that kind of stuff is so in the warp and weft of people's lives. Everyone works.
Mm-hmm.
You can't just sort of scoot through a place and somehow spend days talking to people to move your plot along. People got jobs, they got stuff to do. But yeah, again, with the plant and all that kind of stuff, that was just all really through my reading that you realize, I did a lot of reading around the British and Dutch East India companies, but also just generally when you look at medieval life and stuff, everyone is just worked to the bone, and obviously it's pastoral and kind of agricultural rather than hunter gathering, and so everyone's working back-breaking hours, long hours, thankless work, etc., in a sort of semi-feudal system, so very few people will be idle at all. Everyone else has got stuff to do.
Did you before we let Adrian go, do you have any other questions there? I don't want to have any questions.
None at this time. Okay. I am going to look for the previous two books now.
Fantastic. Hopefully you'll love The Winter Road. The Winter Road has a middle-aged stepmother for a protagonist, which she's a. It would be lovely to catch up with you again about how you see her versus Druna. Because Druna, in some senses, doesn't have quite as much at stake. Taya seems to have a lot more on the line. Her journey seems, I don't know. I find Taya probably suffered more than Druna in an odd way.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. I should also say, I don't know whether you felt this, Steve, because I don't know if you read Snakewood. But the epilogue of Brother Red, obviously there's a little spoiler for Snakewood in there. So if you haven't read Snakewood, but you read the epilogue of Brother Red, it's not going to break the story, but there's a moment in Snakewood where it's just like, oh wow, this thing happened. But if you've read the epilogue of Brother Red, you're like, oh okay, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Well,
Yeah. That's not as impactful as Adrian's trying to make out, but yeah, that's meant to call forward. So for those that do want to go to the other books, the Winter Roads epilogues jumps forward to the letters that Cal and Druna read, and then that's obviously referenced early in Brother Red, and then Brother Red, the epilogue jumps and references Snakewood and a little bit beyond, I think.
I know it's without giving away too much. The epilogue gave me goosebumps.
I wanted it to.
Yeah.
I wanted for people who'd read the other books. I was hoping it would really make you go, "Oh my god!"
Yeah.
I was So I'm delighted that's happened.
Yeah.
Mission accomplished. Yeah.
Definitely. I'll stand by the window and wait. Yeah, that was.
Yeah, I
That
mean
was
that. So yeah, the hymn, Brother Red. I spent probably more. I spent such a lot of time trying to get that right, and again, that particular bit references. I think it's one of the Psalms. Is it John? I can't remember the Psalm that people often read at funerals. My father's house has many rooms. And so yeah, trying to come up with that. The whole stand by the window and wait, but in this room, in this house. I was there are echoes of that again, going back to Jonathan's point. You're pulling in when you're trying to write a hymn or trying to write this thing with a cryptic meaning, and trying to make that resonate or have a, like you say, allow you to create that moment in the epilogue that I was able to create. There's a I can't explain how that happens. I'm glad no one's asked me, how do you come up with your ideas? Because there's no answer.
Well, I think I agree with Layla that you're definitely not a novice writer. So that's.
I've only written 3 books.
Seriously.
Yeah.
Only, yeah.
Yeah, well, compared to I mean, there's I mean, Snakewood was the first book I ever wrote. It just happened to also get published, which is it annoys when you go to writing things, in events, and it's just like, oh, how many books do you have to write before you get published? And 5, 6, 7. Adrian, the first one got published. Sorry,
That's great.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's great.
No, I don't know why. I really I had no idea that Snakewood would end up as it did. It's just kind of shocking. So I've said it I think at the end of the last call, Steve. That sitting here talking about my books is a real delight, because it's all still kind of surreal. To me, that I've written stuff that people want to talk to me about. I still can't get my head around it. So it's lovely. I'm glad it's giving people pleasure. I really am. That's the huge thrill.
Yeah, I love the low fantasy. I don't want to say low stakes, but the low fantasy on the ground, boots on the ground kind of story. So, yeah, great stuff. Loved it.
Yeah, I think like the thing I'm most proud of in this book is chapter 18, which is her arguing with her mother and her father.
Yeah.
And I've said that to people in work and other places. I said that for all the fantasy and the fight brews and everything, that the emotional heart of the book for me is that argument between the 3 of them about what they should and shouldn't do, and the relationship with their father particularly, is the key. And I'm hugely proud of it. But it is just an argument. It is all sat on some stools outside the house. It's like I say, it's the lives and the relationships that for me are the absolute thing. When the next thing I approach again, there's the protagonist and her buddy, her Cal equivalent. That's the thing that I'm working most on, to create that togetherness and that thing where you think, I love these people, I want to follow them and go with them. So that's all I'm focused on, and all the rest is crazy and it goes off world and it's all mad. But really, it's just those 2 people getting to know each other and then how that relationship evolves is the real heart of it going forward. So yeah, get stuck in there.
Nice. Well, thank you again. Really appreciate your time. I know that you're very busy. So thanks for for carving out some time to talk with us.
No, it's a
Yes,
huge pleasure,
thank you.
Steve and Layla. Thank you both for taking the time to set all this up and give me that opportunity. It's great, and thank you to everyone that's given their time over on the thread there and asking questions. I really appreciate it. Thank you all for coming along.
And before we let you go, where's the best place to find you? For people want to check out your work, where's some places to find it?
So if you go to adrianselby.com, because I know you've got Barnes and Noble in the States and Waterstones in the UK and stuff. So wherever you are in the world, adrianselby.com first and foremost. There'll be links there, but there's also links to interviews like this. Once this goes up, I'll be linking to it, and information about the stories. I think there's some audio chapters and all that samples for people to try. But yeah, obviously Amazon has copies, like it does of everything. But yeah, if your local bookstore doesn't have it, and you want to avoid Amazon, definitely try and get them to order it in or something if you're interested in giving it a go. And I think there's a link on my website if you wanted a newsletter. I do a newsletter about once a year, so at the moment it's really slow. But yeah, that's just to keep people up to date with the very little that is going on. So yeah, I won't spam your inbox. It's just stuff that's going on with me.
And thanks to Lauren, Aaron, and Wayne for coming by and asking questions.
Yeah, and Jonathan too, and Joa further up. Thank you all.
Yeah, Joa was here too. Yeah, and Layla, where's the best place to find you?
On Twitter, either at my my regular account, El Goshi, or Ballady Magazine.
Awesome. Yeah, and all those links are in the description. Adrian's website and Layla's accounts are also there too. So thanks again, everyone. Really appreciate everyone's time, and it's always a pleasure. Adrian, thanks again for coming by to talk with us.
Thank you all. Bye.